Yo ho ho! Welcome to my afterthoughts. This is a new series I'll be making instead of doing monthly rewind videos. For every 10 books that I read, an afterthoughts will be posted. These videos consist of little vlogs that I film directly after finishing a book, so I can tell you my thoughts and feelings while they're still fresh in my memory. And this works out pretty well, I find. Other times maybe not so well because I'm too enraged to coherently express myself. But apart from that, I like it. I like the freedom that it gives me, that I don't have to read a certain amount of books every month and then film everything at the end of the month. I can do it as I go. So I hope you enjoy this, and let's get into it. So I just finished reading Kitchen by Yoshimoto. I picked this up at my library. It keeps being suggested to me on Goodreads, so that's why I got it. It's only a little mass market paperback book. I originally thought it was about a woman who falls in love with a transsexual woman and then they go off and have this big love affair. I got my wires a bit crossed. There is a transsexual woman in it, but it's more of a story of bereavement and dealing with being the last member of your family. It's about a girl called Mikage whose grandmother dies, and so she's the last remaining member of her family. And she's taken in by the Tanabe family, who consists of Yuichi and his mother, Eriko. From the get-go, you find out that Eriko is not Yuichi's mother, but in fact father, and is now living as a transsexual woman, and I found that absolutely fascinating. The story goes on from there, but I gotta say, I gave this book 2 stars in the end because it turned more into a love story, and it focused a lot on food. And obviously it's called Kitchen, but I'm not a fan of preparing food or talking about food. I like eating it, but apart from that, I don't really care. I thought it was well written, and I thought the story was very relevant to the trans community today, considering the book was written in the 80s, but it just didn't do much for me. Okay, so I just finished reading The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. First of all, this book must have the longest introduction that I've ever encountered in a book. That much of it is introduction. So all this, who would be bothered? Who has the time to read all that? Who can dribble on for that long? But someone can, apparently. But I'm kind of surprised. Not in a bad way, but really, this is the book. This is the great American classic that's captured so many imaginations. I found it kind of dull. And I'm actually really relieved that I never had to study it in school, because I'm sure I would hate it with a passion now. None of the characters are particularly likable. They're all messes, really. I'm just surprised. I thought more would happen in it. The other thing is, I've been on this planet for 22 years now. I haven't had the ending spoiled on me. I never knew that's what happened in the end. I was like, oh my god. Makes sense. I'm kind of glad it happened like that. I don't know if I was surprised. I could see where it was going. I wasn't emotionally connected with it, so I didn't really care that much. The only character that I found that had any sort of connection with was with Daisy's husband, Tom, when he was giving out to Gatsby about all that old sport business. I was like, go on, Tom, tell him. Tell him how annoying it is. Oh, it's so old sport. The other good thing that came from me reading this is that Florence and the Machine song finally makes sense. Which is alright. I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads. So I just finished reading Sputnik Sweetheart by Haruki Murakami. This is my first 1-star book of the year. I really did not like this. It's about a woman called Sumir. Okay, don't quote me on that pronunciation. I'm not quite sure how to say her name. She is an aspiring writer. She loves the Beat Generation. She's really inspired by Jack Kerouac. And she meets a woman called Miu, who is 17 years her senior. She's this real kind of classy businesswoman, and she falls in love with her. Now, Miu is married. She isn't interested in a relationship with Sumir, but they're really great friends. They end up going on a business trip together and end up in a Greek island, and Sumir then just vanishes into thin air. And that's kind of it. The story is told from Samir's best friend's perspective, Kay, and he's in love with Samir, and so it's like a weird kind of love triangle, but no one's actually aware that it's a love triangle. So that's the first thing that kind of put me off, because I'm not really into romance. So the whole idea of the book is that there are different dimensions, but there is no evidence. The only thing we're going by is that something weird like that happened to Miu when she was younger. She saw a different version of herself, and she got such a fright from what happened to her that her hair turned white from the fright. And I thought that was quite cool. That was the only bit of the story I actually liked. But the rest of it was just if it wasn't fluff, then it was filler, especially the ending. The whole book just felt underdeveloped. It felt badly plotted out, and the dots didn't connect. And I think that was my main problem. I didn't like it. It didn't make any sense, and I was kind of confused by it, and I just couldn't wait. It was one of those books that I couldn't wait for it to end. In my head I was like, okay, I've only got 50 pages left, I can knock this out. It was hard. I found it really difficult. Now I'm not going to let it put me off reading Murakami in the future, but I don't think it's a very good start. Alright, so I finished The Fifth Child by Doris Lessing earlier today. It's about a couple called Ben and Harriet who want to have a load of kids. Basically they fall in love and they just want to get a move on with their family and things, and they start pumping out kid after kid after kid, even though they actually can't really afford them, and everything is perfect. They're very happy with their lives, and then Harriet becomes pregnant for a fifth time, and this is very odd since they're using protection. They don't want to get pregnant for a while. They want to raise the children that they already have before they have their next child. So from the get-go it's kind of odd that Harriet becomes pregnant, and it's not an easy pregnancy. It's very difficult. The baby's very strong. It's kicking her. It's hurting her. And then once the child is born, they name him Ben, and there's obviously something wrong with him, even though the doctors say that he's perfectly healthy. He's just a bit big for his age. But the family think that there is something wrong with him, that there's something just not right with him. He casts this really dark cloud over the family's life. We're basically talking about a child born with no empathy. I do like reading books about children who may potentially grow up to be serial killers or really messed up human beings. One of the things that I thought was particularly creepy about Ben's character was how he would mimic the other children, their mannerisms and how they behaved. It was just quite creepy. The other thing is, no one in the family seems to have any love for Ben. They're all living in fear of him. The other children become very neglected by their mother because all her time and energy is going into raising Ben. You see the effects of, from the beginning, what they wanted their life to be, what they wanted their marriage and their children to be, and then in the end with what they're left with after having Ben. I know there's a second part to this book, Ben as a grown-up. I don't know if I'd really be interested in picking it up. I might not. Good, not great or fabulous or mind-blowing, but I thought it was pretty good, and if you're into reading about messed up children, this would definitely be your cup of tea. I gave 3 stars on Goodreads. Today I finished The Man Who Fell to Earth by Walter Tevis. I've just filmed a review on that, which you've probably seen because I've probably posted it by now. Definitely my favourite book so far this year. Going into it I didn't really know if I was going to like it or not. The synopsis on the back didn't really jump out to me, but I have wanted to read this for years, and it's been out of print for the last, I want to say about the last year. I know it's coming back into print in June, but I wish I had this. I don't want to give this edition back to the library. Like, I want this edition and I can't find it anywhere. But yeah, I absolutely love this. The main theme of this is feeling of alienation, and I think that's something we all feel from time to time. But it's about Thomas J. Newton comes to Earth in order to make as much money as physically possible in order to save his people and bring them to Earth, and then they will blend in with Earthlings and get good jobs, and they will help the human race. I don't know if you could describe it as like a coming of age story, or it's kind of like a coming to terms with being a human and how difficult it is to be a human, and the things that the world throw at us that we have to kind of say no, otherwise we will ruin ourselves. Obviously I knew the kind of ending that it was heading towards because of all the foreshadowing. It was sad. It was really upsetting. I hate human beings. Like, they ruin everything. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Okay, so I'm cheating here a bit because this isn't exactly an afterthought. So I read this about a week and a half ago now, and it is The Collector by John Fowles. This was the Insane in the Membrane pick for February. So it's about a guy called Frederick who kidnaps a girl he has a fixation with. So the book is told from 2 perspectives. Obviously it's told from Frederick's perspective, and we're seeing him plotting and planning his kidnapping and his thoughts then after he's kidnapped Miranda. The second half of the book is all from Miranda's point of view, so she's writing kind of like journal entries. When I was reading Frederick's side of the story, I felt so bad for Miranda. When I was reading from her perspective, I was like hoping that Frederick would kill her because I found her really, really irritating, and I just lost all sympathy for her for some reason. And then when it switched back at the end, back to Frederick's perspective, I felt sorry for her again. So I was just like, what the hell? One thing like I picked up on from the book, considering she's held down in a basement for 2 months, there's no mention of a period or her getting a period, or him having to go out and buying her sanitary pads or tampons or anything like that, and I found that really weird. That would be a major concern. If I got kidnapped, I'd be like, oh, for Christ's sake. It would be a thing. It's a rather, important thing. Another thing that I picked up on that I didn't want to say on the Goodreads group, because I didn't want to be the first person to say it, because I didn't want people to be like, oh, well, of course your mind goes there. But it's obvious that Frederick is a fetishist. He has certain kinks that I don't think he's even aware of. One of the things is he chloroforms Miranda and then changes her clothes. That's a fetish. And he says that it excites him, the idea of her being unconscious. Obviously he's got the whole bondage thing going on. He mentions that, constantly tying her up and having her gagged and stuff. The whole taking photographs of her when she's unconscious or when she is conscious and wanting her to pose for him. And I think there was something about shoes thing, so I think there was a mention of her in shoes and taking photographs of her when she's in high heels or something like that, and I was like, fucking knew it. So it's rather interesting. He's obviously someone who doesn't understand his sexuality at all. He hasn't come to terms with it. He just is kind of unaware of it. He thinks he's a gentleman. He's fascinated with someone who doesn't exist. He likes her exterior only, and when he finds out who she really is, he kind of starts really resenting her. I wasn't really enthralled in it. That's a downer, but it was grand. So yeah, so I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on the Goodreads. Hey, so I just finished reading Strangers by Taichi Yamada. This is the story of Harada, who is a man in his late 40s who has just gone through a divorce. He's in a kind of transitional period of life where he's adjusting to being on his own again. He's moved into a new apartment and he is very isolated. He works as a scriptwriter, so he leads a very, very isolated life. It's the story of him kind of going into his past and dealing with trauma he experienced in childhood. He decides to go back to his hometown for a visit, and he runs into his father at a theatre, except the thing is his father died and so does his mother. They were killed in a hit and run accident when Harada was 12. I thought at first when I was reading it, I was wondering, is this one of those stories where the chap's just gone insane, he's just gone a bit mad and he's talking to himself? He was wondering it himself. He was like, I've completely lost the plot. It's more of a kind of sad story as it deals with grief and trying to gain closure as an adult after experiencing something horrendous as a child, because as a 12-year-old you don't really know how to process the fact that your parents leave one day and they just never come back, and you see how much he feels he needs his parents and how much he wasn't able to process their death. The ending of the book, it kind of took a bit of a sinister twist, and I wasn't really expecting that, and I felt really stupid that I didn't notice it, because I was busy staring at what was happening over here. I didn't bother to look at what was directly in front of me, and then I felt really thick for not copping on and realizing what was actually happening. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. It's kind of funny because the first book I read this year was a story of dealing with death and dealing with grief, but I didn't really like that because of the romance aspect. I much preferred this sort of take on the subject. Okay, about an hour ago I finished reading Close Musicboys by Viv Albertine. Viv is best known for being the guitarist in the band The Slits, who were an all-female punk reggae band in the late 70s, early 80s. So I decided to pick up her memoir because I'm interested in the band, I'm interested in that period of time and the punk scene and all that jazz, and this has really been eye-opening for me, and I really enjoyed it. I did have a bit of a problem with Viv's writing style. I don't know, it just didn't really click with me. I felt like I read this much slower than I would normally read a book. This was a great look into the English punk scene in the late 70s, and I didn't know that everyone, it never really occurred to me before that everyone knew each other. Viv went out with Mick Jones from The Clash and was really good friends with Sid Vicious, and I didn't know that there was that connection at all. She doesn't hold back and throws everything out there. I like the whole warts and all approach when it comes to memoirs, and it was a hard read too, because Viv hasn't had an easy life, and reading about her various miscarriages and problems getting pregnant, being a woman and reading about things like that is quite difficult and saddening. I think it was very brave of her to write all about that. I really appreciate it. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads. Okay, so I have finally finished reading Bitch in Praise of Difficult Women by Elizabeth Wurtzel. I started reading this book at the end of December, and I read about 100 pages, and then I got really distracted by library books. So for the past 2 weeks I've just been kind of binge reading this. And let me tell you, this is a dense book. So this is a collection of 5 essays, or 6 essays if you want to count the epilogue. And they all have themes that they center around. So the first essay toys with the idea of women bringing men down, the idea of she drove him to it, and the example that is referenced in this is Samson and Delilah. The second essay focuses in on older men going after young women or girls. The Amy Fisher case is used as an example. Essay 3 is about the romanticization of women with mental illness, fascination that people have with women who come undone, so like Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. Essay 4 focuses a lot on Hillary Clinton, and Essay 5 is the idea of I loved her so much I had to kill her, so the Nicole Brown Simpson case. This book threw so many new ideas at me, and I had to keep a notebook next to me while I was reading it, because to be honest, I think I wrote more than I actually read. I love it when I stumble across a book that I know will stay with me probably for the rest of my life, and this threw some new ideas at me, ideas that I'd never really thought about before or questioned. And the older I get, the more question everything resonates with me. So this, I feel like I read this book at the most perfect time in my life. It was just completely eye-opening, and I really, really adored it. I read Prozac Nation when I was 15 or 16, so I knew I liked her writing style. And although I didn't agree with some of her personal opinions on people, I was still able to really enjoy and take away something from what she was saying. I highly, highly recommend this if you are looking for some solid feminist literature, and I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads. So I just finished reading I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I polished this off in one sitting, so that should tell you how much I enjoyed it. I just picked it up earlier and couldn't put it back down. It was riveting. It's about an epidemic that has infected pretty much everyone on Earth. It's a bacteria that travels through dust storms and mosquitoes and has turned everyone into vampire-like creatures. And for some reason our main character, Neville, is immune to it, and he has his own theories as to why that is. But basically he's the last man on Earth, and it's a story that follows his kind of everyday routines and his life now. I won't go too more into it because it's a very short book and I can easily ruin it for people. I found this to be a very well-balanced novel. There wasn't any moment that I was bored or waiting to get onto the next bit of action. From start to finish it had my attention, and it played like a movie in my head. I guess that's why I couldn't really put it down. When I picked it up, I didn't realise it was like an outbreak novel, so I was very pleased with this. It appealed to the horror fan in me, even though it's not horrific, it's not gory or anything, but it is a scary thought. This book went on to inspire a lot of zombie movies. The whole kind of zombie apocalypse genre sprung from the idea of this book. So I'd say that if you're a horror fan, this is definitely a must read. I can't get over how well written it was, and I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads.